Hey everyone, it's Patrick Lovell, Truth Bomb riffing on Friday, July 7th, 2023 at approximately 12:30 p.m. my time. And I just got information I didn't expect to hear today. I have really been in a kerfuffle, so to speak, because a huge part of my existence, in fact, probably my sole existence over the course of the last 13 years, has been dedicated to trying to uncover and discern what exactly our country has become. And it manifested into a monumental project called the Con, which is available now. And this is the news that I didn't anticipate hearing, but it's available now and for the foreseeable future at www.thecon.tv for free. So I was notified by our distributor and a close friend and partner for over the years that the con would be going away on June 30th. And I was made to believe that it was going to be erased from history and completely whitewashed, which means it whitewashed me and my story and everything that I've sacrificed for to become who I am. It just a press of a button. And I'd been manic, so to speak. It's been very difficult for me to think that everything that I put into this, tens of thousands of hours of effort, not to mention the business side of it, not to mention the investigative side, not to mention all of the things that we had to do to actually execute this enormous effort. But ultimately, that would either become sabotaged by the sort of forces of censorship, which we all have been sort of clued into since Matt Taibbi did the Twitter files and however that manifests throughout social media. But, behind the scenes, I've always sort of speculated that considering the information that we set forth with the credibility that it has, considering who is in the con, and the entirety of it, which reveals what it does, which is the largest criminal conspiracy and cover up in history, bar none, that created the world that we live in, it wasn't difficult for me to see it two ways. The first was considering that BlackRock, which many of you are now aware of in a way that you weren't aware of 5 years ago, for example, I thought could have potentially put us on a blacklist and kibosh the whole thing. It's all very peculiar what happened behind the scenes. I'm a business development guy. We were represented by some of the biggest, agency in Hollywood in the apparatus, and we got tripped up time and time again. And I could go on and on about what that reveals, but it's still relatively a kind of a peculiar speculation of, yeah, did we get jammed up on that, or is there just so much noise and misinformation and disinformation that the truth has just been whitewashed from history? And so I was contending with that, literally in a way that I'd lost sleep. I mean, I've lost everything in pursuit of this. I just recently got a divorce. My son, who was an All-American, basically had his high school career just completely train wrecked by everything that didn't manifest as a result of our efforts. And at the end of this, I kind of figured, you know, wow, in addition to all of the other challenges that we've been up against and the failure that we've, you know, been, basically ramroded into, that then it was going to be whitewashed from history. And by whitewashing the con from history, not only would it whitewash our effort and our amazing story that basically redeemed me and fulfilled me until it didn't because of all of the other challenges and sacrifices and struggle and suffering that has all manifested from this, but it would have also erased the story of Michael Winston, who has since had his life completely destroyed. He was zapped with this crazy toxic waste in a plume back in, I don't know, I think it's 2005, 6-ish, that ended up giving him laryngeal cancer because, like me, he's a very gifted, well, I shouldn't say like me, much more gifted than me as a speaker, but I mean, he relies on his voice. And he ultimately got laryngeal cancer, you know, ironically, strangely, coincidentally, as a major whistleblower at one of the largest vectors of this crime that emanated from Countrywide and Angelo Mazzillo. And if you understand anything about Angelo Mazzillo, the CEO, former CEO of Countrywide, I mean, the guy looks like he's straight out of the mob. And, I just have been scratching my head ever since. But the long and the short of it is that Michael Winston had his voice basically destroyed. And he had gone through, I think, 26 laryngeal cancer surgeries, and still hanging on by a thread and still fighting the good fight. And that would have been erased from history. The story of Richard Bowen, the story of literally the monumental revelation of Richard Bowen is like nothing, quite frankly, in history. He was the top, underwriter for senior vice president for Citigroup, which was involved with $80 billion a year of vectoring mortgage-backed securities in the time period between 2005, 2006, obviously fluctuated in that time period, but reaching, 80 billion a year and being filled with toxic waste, 80% illegal reps and warranties that he tried desperately to stop. That led him up the food chain of the executives at Citigroup, only to be suppressed and quashed. And then he did the exact same thing with the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Federal Crisis Inquiry Commission and even more. And a guy of just incredible, impeccable integrity ends up purged from a career of which he should have become either maybe the CEO, given what he did of Citi, or maybe even a senior actor at the Securities and Exchange Commission, considering the courage he displayed to try to end one of the largest vectors of grift in the history of the world, only to be quashed by a corrupt system that saved none other than former Secretary of the Treasury and former CEO of Goldman Sachs, Robert Rubin, that, through a myriad of things that we reveal in a way that nobody else ever has, which is still news to this day, which is monumentally larger than the entire sum total of Donald Trump, because it led to a $3 trillion emergency bailout of Citi, all based on fraud. You can't even quantify this in comparison to Watergate. That would have been gone if we whitewashed the con from history. The story of Chris Swecker, the former director of investigations for the FBI, that put together a nationwide dragnet that had this stuff dead to rights, but then he got quashed by former Attorney General of the Bush administration, Mr. Gonzalez, who basically decided to take resources away from white-collar crime investigations at the FBI and then turn it into investigations into porn. That's how ridiculous things got at that time period, which is now over 15 years ago. And we got his testimony in the con that reveals exactly what the FBI knew. And this guy, who's frequently a contributor on Fox News, and everybody's all-American, one of the most honest guys I've ever met in my life and a straight shooter, this guy tells us straight up that the whole thing was a racketeering enterprise and RICO should have been used to take down the dons of Wall Street. That would have been erased from history. We have Paul Pelletier, the former director of investigations at the Department of Justice, who was spearheading the investigation into AIG. Tell us exactly what took place during the Obama administration when then former Attorney General Eric Holder chose to quash the investigation that would have taken down all of the CEOs on Wall Street. For anybody who ever paid attention to what was going on at that time, Lenny Brewer, the Assistant Attorney General of the United States, famously went on Frontline at that time period, who politely had suggested that the government was working for the financial system, even though the financial system was guilty of rotting criminal activity. That would have been whitewashed. In addition to that, the testimony of Gary Agarian, the revelations of the largest insider information scandal that ever took place at the SEC, ultimately got quashed because then former CEO of Morgan Stanley was able to work his magic inside the corridors of power with Mary Jo White at the Securities and Exchange Commission that quashed the investigation that Gary Agari ultimately prevailed in, but that gives us the sort of tentacles and understanding of what actually took place in the nation's agency responsible for policing Wall Street, which then reveals the revolving door. Same with with Dennis Kelleher. Dennis Kelleher, one of the greatest minds in vectors in revealing all of the corruption on Wall Street in service to an economy that actually works. His testimony would have been revealed. That revealed incredible cohesion in racketeering through the banks that led to his extraordinary work and his agency's extraordinary work at Better Markets that gave us the rap sheet, which infers and reveals the $29 trillion getaway that Wall Street has been manifesting ever since the collapse of 2008. And finally, and I could go on and on because there's so much more, but the story of Addie Polk, a 91-year-old African-American widow who was the embodiment of the American dream, given everything that took place from Jim Crow to the Great Migration to what took place with African Americans getting a slice of home ownership thanks to Community Reinvestment Act and other acts that took place to rid what was then known as redlining. She ends up having to commit suicide by shooting herself in the chest 5 times the day that the sheriffs arrived to evict her based on documentation fabrication. And because of her tragic consequence that we found, that we opened up the door, we discovered the only RICO, Racketeering Influence Corrupt Organization Act revelation that took place in none other than Summit County, Ohio, based on the leadership of then former Attorney General Mark Dan and his colleague Tom Murphy, that did what the FBI and the DOJ and the SEC collectively and the AGs around the country didn't do, which proves the largest criminal conspiracy and cover-up in history. And then, of course, everything that I have done that led me to understand, based on everything that I know, and then 300 hours that we have on the shelf that we couldn't get out to the world because we got quashed one way or the other, either by the American people's lack of appetite for the truth or some, diabolical sabotage, or maybe some combination. Who knows? But the bottom line, what we discovered and what I ultimately carried through to the very end is the ultimate revelation that in 2009, the Federal Reserve backdoored $29 trillion illegally vis-a-vis Sullivan and Cromwell, with Roger Cohen revealing that the reason why they had to, on behalf of the consortium of the financial system, which certainly sounds like a racketeering enterprise to me, given his language to the Federal Crisis Inquiry Commission, revealed that they had to do this emergency lending because they didn't know how far the multi-pledged grift of these securities, of these revenue streams from single houses multiplied infinitum to create a $600 to $800 trillion mega collapse of the global economy that we bailed out the motherfuckers that destroyed the world, and then they bought the courts. So when you understand all of this stuff that's happening in the Supreme Court right now, vis-a-vis billionaires and Supreme Court justices, just know that the corruption had worked its way through the entirety of the United States judicial system, particularly in the appellate courts, of which I'm in the midst of trying to uplift the story of Bruce Jacobs, among others, to reveal of this insane corruption that continues to use documentation fabrication to whitewash and bury millions of Americans. The financial terrorism that has like a nuclear freaking bomb destroyed the middle class of this country over decades, that has led to massive corruption and cover-up by the media, by the Department of Justice, by the FBI, not the players that we have in the con, but others that are played ball in the revolving door, including the likes of Senator Warren, who has hidden this from you, even though she knows a lot about it, and Bernie Sanders, who once famously quipped Wall Street's business model is fraud, but he never understood the details, even though our mentor, William K. Black, who taught us the synergy of all of it and the history of all of it, was his advisor. The betrayal is phenomenal. This system of corruption is every bit as involved and massive, quite frankly, in reverse, like the dark mirror reflection of what it would have taken to create NASA and deliver a man to the moon, only to bury the American dream. So Adam Bronfman, unbeknownst to me, a guy that I talked to every day for the last 13 years until we didn't because he got fed up that the truth had no value. And he basically cut me off because why would you want to continue moving forward trying to do something when there's no value? No business person ever does that. But our country is awash with brain dead people that don't care about what our society has become. But that's not me, and nor is it the people that I surround myself with. I understand the power of the United States and the dignity and the decency of integrity that gives us liberty. And without it, we're doomed. MAGA and Trump is just an expression of all this. The Con is now available for free to the world at www.thecon.tv.